Destroyed pictures, he would slash them. There are in existence pictures with knife marks through them.
He paved the way for Cubism and Picasso, but would have hated it all.
He'd have thought they were mad. He'd have flown into a terrible rage.
He was the first rebel artist, yet he longed to belong.
He was not interested in being a contemporary artist. He wanted his pictures in the Louvre.
The paradox and passion of Paul Cézanne in 3 colours begins in half an hour on BBC Two.
First on to this week's Midland Report.
Hospitals in the Midlands are working harder than ever before. Emergency admissions are at record levels. Patients are being left on trolleys and operations cancelled because hospitals haven't got enough beds. As the government admits the system is under strain, doctors fear lives are being put at risk.
Hi Marie, what's your situation at the moment? Lovely. Okay, wonderful, thank you very much, bye. See you soon, can I help you?
In the battle for hospital beds, Michelle Shannon is in the front line. It's her job to find places for patients at Selly Oak Hospital in Birmingham, an increasingly difficult task when emergency admissions have reached unprecedented levels.
The frustrating thing is that sort of the ambulance crews all come through the door together before you've had time to move the patients out. I mean, I've got about 4 patients this afternoon that are going out that are all waiting for hospital transport. So you can't use the beds, obviously, until they've gone. So although you know they're there, it doesn't stop what comes through the door, does it? So timing, I think, is the crucial thing, really, or lack of it.
This is Selly Oak's emergency admissions ward. All patients pass through here for assessment and initial treatment. They're not generally accident victims, brought in via casualty and 999 calls. The current beds crisis is down to the rise in medical emergencies. These patients are often referred by their GPs with potentially life-threatening conditions, such as heart problems, strokes or asthma. When all the beds are taken, patients end up having to wait on trolleys in hospital corridors, an increasingly common sight this winter, the busiest on record. Norman Tongue has been luckier than his wife Barbara. When she was a patient at Selly Oak last month, she had to wait for a bed.
I came in at about 12:30 in the morning, and we sat in the waiting room all afternoon, and then I was put into a bed about 5:30. Well, I could see they were very, very busy. There were so many people, and I accepted it.
The delays are far too long. This is the most dangerous time in a patient's medical life. They're often teetering on the brink of death, and time is of the essence. Any time spent between a diagnosis being made and a need for urgent admission and the time that patient gets into hospital, it can literally make a difference between life and death.
Are you all right sitting up in the chair down here? You're all right sitting up, Rob?
When you sit here and see these nurses running around, you wonder how they do it. They seem to be running through it like a New Street station, you know. But they seem to cope at the end of the day.
I've been working on medical wards for about 6 years. I don't remember having this problem sort of 4 or 5 years ago. The problem definitely shows itself more on this sort of ward than a general medical ward. The general medical ward, once you're full, that's it, you can't take any more patients. Whereas in an admissions ward, you can't say no to emergency admissions, so therefore it does become more apparent on this sort of ward.
It can be quite hectic at times, but I just try and have to pacify people for most of the time and say that we will get a bed eventually for you. I'm sorry that you do have to wait, but that's the way it is at the moment. But usually most people are quite good and quite understanding about it.
I had a bad attack of asthma and infection on my chest. I tried to treat it at home, but it wasn't possible. So I came in Saturday. But they said there was no beds on the other wards for the medical. There was plenty of surgical, but no medical. So we have to remain here till I'm hoping to go home on Wednesday.
This is where the logjam starts. patients are supposed to move on within 24 hours if there's room in the main wards of the hospital. Marjorie Priestley is one of many forced to stay here because there isn't room.
What do you think about the fact that there's no bed for you?
Well, it is a bit bad really, isn't it, when you know. But still, I suppose that's the way it is, isn't it? It is. We've locked all this contact on the NHS, and I suppose that's something we've got to look forward to, even worse in the future.
It's a similar story in Nottingham. The Queen's Medical Centre is one of Britain's busiest hospitals. Here too, they've opened an admissions ward to try and cope with medical emergencies. The phones never stop.
Since last April, we've seen a 23% increase in emergency admissions, particularly in terms of medicine. And that builds on similar increases in the previous 2 years. In terms of the effect on the hospital, of course, if you've got huge increases in emergency medicine admissions, they're using beds that otherwise would be occupied by patients who are having routine elective operations. So it means inevitably that we're having to use those beds for emergencies, and our waiting lists are going to increase because we aren't able to have those beds available to do those routine operations.
We can't close casualty and neither can we close, so we've obviously got to find somewhere to put them, and as quickly as possible, because what we don't want is patients lying on trolleys down in casualty. We then discuss with the other wards throughout the hospital if they can take any of our patients, and we would then try and move some of the patients from the other medical wards to their beds.
Managing the peaks and troughs of demand is a difficult business. This morning is relatively quiet, but in one 24-hour period last month, patients came into the QMC at the rate of 1 every 15 minutes. In a hospital as big as this, that poses serious problems for medical staff.
At one point, we had 80 medical patients sleeping in surgical wards. Now, this is a problem to us. Queen's is a big hospital, the surgical wards are quite a long way away, the juniors have a long way to go to see the patients and so on. I don't think we've lost a patient yet, but it would be very easy to lose a patient in a hospital of this size and forget they existed. So that's a problem. And then, of course, there's a problem to the surgeons, because if we occupy their beds, then they can't use them, and their elective surgery stops.
How would you sum up what it's been like over the last few weeks?
Organised chaos, I think.
In fact, right across the Midlands, there's now compelling evidence that the health service is feeling distinctly under the weather. Let's review the symptoms. An unprecedented rise in emergency admissions is putting a huge strain on the system. Many patients are finding their local hospitals closed to them, and when they do get in, they face a long wait for a bed. And routine operations are being cancelled, Birmingham, Nottingham, Stoke, Derby and elsewhere, because of a lack of space. So what's causing the problem? Well, with such a clear set of symptoms, we should be able to come up with a diagnosis.
Hi Connie, it's Michelle. Sorry to bother you. You haven't got anything else sort of to offer, have you? Oh right, what time will that be available? Anything come up that might sort of put a smile on my face? Hang on a second. Is that on the lobby around this afternoon? And that's Query Mail and Query Mail side ward. Okie dokies. Thanks, Anne. Bye.
How would you sum up the situation?
Usual Monday today. Everything happens but later in the day. I mean, today it's a case of, they all come through the door before you move out, instead of moving out first. It, doesn't happen the way you want it, does it? 1 or 2 queries coming up, but they're just waiting for doctors' rounds this afternoon, so if they happen, then obviously we can use those beds later on today.
How difficult is your job?
It's not too bad. You feel like you're chasing your tail, and there's a lot of sort of patients that are waiting X-ray results, blood results, and you've got to go back and keep checking that those have happened and the doctors have been there to discharge. Maggie? Hello? Do you want anything?
No, there's nothing today.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all.
Nothing?
Coming up today.
You've not got anybody waiting to go off site anyway?
No, not at all.
Right, have all your rounds been done?
Yeah.
Beautiful? Yeah. Okay, if there's any change, would you let me know? I will, definitely. All right, wonderful. Thanks.
Why do you come round the wards? Why do you do that?
I find it easy to actually talk to somebody on the ward to get more of a feel of what's going on. If you walk on any ward, you automatically get, we're full, nothing going home. And it's amazing the change throughout the day. You may have patients patients that are waiting for investigations, and I always write down what they're telling me so I can come back and check it later on. I know which consultants go around the wards on which days, and I sort of tag along to the end of the ward round to see if anybody's been discharged. As helpful as they won't actually ring you and tell you they've got beds. You actually sort of have to catch them at the right time, really.
So you pounce when a bed becomes free then?
Yes, a few people will tell you I do, yes. Yes. Get the comments about hammocks and bunk beds and all the rest of it, standard type jokes.
Initial research suggests a complex cocktail of factors is to blame for the rise in emergency admissions. In particular, an increasingly aged population and a decline in the numbers of relatives prepared to look after them at home. It's no coincidence that hospitals are busiest in winter, when the elderly fall victim to chest infections and flu.
There does seem to be a genuine increase in illness. All the studies that have been done suggest that quite a lot of the demand is appropriate demand. We're finding more people, especially older people, becoming ill with respiratory problems and other conditions, and they genuinely do need hospital care in those circumstances. Also, it seems that GPs may be less willing now, compared with in the past, to continue to look after sick people at home and in the community, and they expect hospitals to take on more responsibility for that. The other factor, of course, is that hospitals are having to juggle all sorts of competing priorities, especially bringing down waiting times to achieve the patient's charter. That means they don't have much spare capacity for dealing with these peaks in demand when they occur during the winter. So there's a range of reasons, and there's no single and simple explanation.
GPs have also been accused of being over-hasty in sending people to hospital. They, in return, believe patients are often discharged from hospital too early, only to get sick again. As a result, GPs say they have to readmit the same patients, the so-called revolving door syndrome.
Now, the reason hospitals dump them, of course, is that it can add a successfully treated episode to its statistical numbers. So they claim they're treating more and more patients all of the time. I'm saying they are not doing that. They are simply recycling unsatisfactorily handled acute cases.
It's a real risk that you're going to send people home too early. There's a very fine judgment, and the more pressure you've got on people, the more likely you are to send them home perhaps too soon.
I have colleagues and friends who work in hospitals. They don't want to discharge these patients. I've spoken to doctors in tears, asking so-called ward managers to keep them in a day or two longer, feeling really frustrated and frightened, but unable to change the system as it works at the moment.
The NHS is treating more people than ever before, yet huge numbers of hospital beds have been lost. Overall, emergency admissions have risen by more than 20% since 1990. In the same period, government figures show almost 8,500 beds have been lost in health authorities covering the Midlands. Among those studying the crisis is one of Britain's most controversial health experts. Roy Lilly has called for GPs to be scrapped and for doctors to put their employers before their patients. But he shares clinicians' concerns about the loss of beds.
I think we've been sucked down this efficiency route, and because medical technology now is so staggering in what we can achieve, it's easy to say, well, you know, a hernia, we can do a hernia in a day, and cataracts in 4 hours and so on, and we tend to overlook the need to have beds for this hiatus in demand phenomenon, which is starting to appear now.
Well, a lot of our GP colleagues say the trend will continue, and we've said every year for the last 2-3 years it can't be worse next year. Every year it's 10 or 15% worse.
To reach a diagnosis in complex cases, there's often more than one explanation. An increasingly elderly population is leading to higher levels of sickness, especially in winter. Patients expect more these days, including easier access to hospital specialists. And then there's the so-called revolving door scenario, where patients are passed between hospitals and GPs who say they're too sick to be at home. And bed cuts mean hospitals no longer have the spare capacity to ride the roller coaster of fluctuating demand. Assuming all these factors have some part to play, what can be done to control the problem? Is there a treatment for this condition?
Right, so there's nothing on the list to come in. Right, okay. Cheers, thanks, bye.